thank you very much for inviting me as a panelist. And it's of course very important discussion, and I would like to be very straightforward. And so this. Yeah, actually, as we speak here, so there's another meeting. There's another discussion happening in a parallel universe, but it's of course it's about in the same building. Right? My challenge to Mr. Sabri is that if you can convey the same message that you try to convey here to that audience, so that would be, that's going to be an extremely fruitful discussion. Right? So that's the challenge. Right? Because, I've been in this business of discussing about nationalism for about 35 years, right? And so it's what you say is that there's nothing new, and then we have been hearing about this inclusive nationalism, and the need to how challenging it's as politically, right? The problem is quite, obvious, that we are grappling with this the problem of how to build the nation. Actually, the very first challenge of the when we are ready to be independent in 1948, the very first challenge was to faced by the political elite at that time, how to bring together the political forces belonging to the various ethno-nationalist groups. That's the reason behind the naming, the nomenclature of the first political party, the United National Party, and so they decided to call it United National Party, to show that so we try to bring together all the, but it didn't last long, right? It didn't last long. It's not a minor thing, right? It's what happened in 1956, 8 years after 48 experiment. That was a culmination of a long-term trend that started in I would say in mid 19th century, where the Sri Lankan nationalism, they started as a massive ideological political force, right? That started not as a inclusive discourse, right? And it was exclusive in the sense that and actually it's a long story, but if I try to make this long story shorter, so the breeding ground of Sri Lankan nationalism is of course the religious revival movement, so where the religious identity play a very important role. So there's an issue of identity and difference, right? So you have to construct the other, right? And then what do you mean by so when you say nationalism, you say something, you are thinking about something that in you, an essence, right? Identity, right? So you have to exclude something, right? You have to exclude something, right? So that is the problem. But this has been a problem, this has been a political challenge which many nationalists try to address. So that's how this notion civic nationalism emerged, right? The concept civic nationalism, which is very much similar to what Mrs. Abdi termed as inclusive nationalism, it was intended to bring together all the, and actually, the nation state preceded nationalism. Actually, the nation state, the basic form of nation state emerged following this famous 1648, what is it? I forgot. 1648 Westphalia Agreement, right? So that is that. It was that agreement not intended to form nation state, but that the intention was to respect the boundary of each dynastic realm, right? So since that peace, Westphalian peace, lasted very long, and these boundaries, the permanent boundaries, were established, and so then it created a kind of territorially based state system, right? And then so there was what we can call as dynastic realm, right? So there were, so since these are very long trends, so there were linguistic communities and all kind of historical forces, right? So then came French Revolution, right, where the nation became the fundamental concept, right? And so then in Europe, so there are ethnic divisions, or history was much different, but we don't have time to discuss it. If we have time, we can go into detail. But so there was a never-ending, state formation process based on national identities, because still it's not over. Every the people thought that with First World War that will be over. All the people, everyone accepted nations' right to self-determination as a universal principle, and but then that didn't stop, and also then communism collapsed, another wave started. So now still, so we have separatist movements in in Spain, right, in Barcelona is Catalonia, and very places, and there are some very small movements. For example, in very small Netherlands, so there's an area called Friesland, right? So they also have, they don't have separatist movement, and they're also emphasizing their own identity, right? But our part of the world, this situation is extremely complicated, right? And so then in this context, I think the problem is that how to ground this kind of alternative imagination about inclusive nationalism. It's a formidable political challenge. The problem is that it is. In my view, it is much easier to think about political imagination beyond nationalism, right? Rather than trying to sort of repair the nationalism in order to include. But it's the nationalism. It's not only a political principle. It's not only a political identity. It's a kind of it's psychological, right? It's about our certain psychic needs, right? And so therefore the ethnic groups, now actually the problem is that if you have a political entity, if you have a geopolitical entity for each ethnic identity groups, that's okay, right? So then, no problem. But unfortunately, we don't have that kind of, right, situation. Even if, we let the Tamils to, carve out a separate state in the north and east, but that also, problem would be ended. There are other people, and also there are Tamils in, outside the north and east, right? And it's never-ending process. And also, then as a solution, which has been proposed against this secessionist trend is not actually inclusive nationalism, but a political arrangement. So this is the message being articulated in the other universe, right? So there is an identity which is part of the historical, true history of the country, right? So that historical right has to be accepted, right? Then once you accept that, for example, if I say it straightforward, if you accept the right of Sinhala Buddhist to the country, so that right is being articulated in terms of a particular historical narrative, where history is considered to be as what I call as a charter of right. So then, you are asked, the non-Sinhala Buddhists are asked to accept that version as a fact, as a legitimate fact, and then, so by virtue of accepting that, but you consider yourself as secondary kind of citizen, right? So that's the logical, outcome. So this is the challenge. Do we have a discursive capability to overcome this challenge, right? Of course, we can, there are a lot of rhetorics, this rhetorically possible, and, group of us, the like-minded group of people can get together and, right? So when there's the ethnic nationalism is asserted, so there is a discontent. That always there's a discontent. No? So since there's in the last few elections, we know this bifurcation, north-south bifurcation, and the various kind of polarization, as you mentioned. And then always, there's a kind of discontent. We feel embarrassed by, these divisions, and, we are trying to do something, right? So then we, come up with this kind of notion. But the problem is that, this unchallengeable, the problem remains. So that's so that's the question that I would like to pose.